Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Med, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh, the Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City. We're recording this on day 543 of the war and the hostages, praying that they return as always, wishing that we didn't have to start the podcast or the show this way. But we're mindful of them. We're always mindful of them because we feel, I think rightly so, that in this present moment in Jewish history where we're stuck, and unless these hostages come home, we will be stuck. And the message that I think many of us are carrying is a message that, especially over the last few days, I think it's really central that there needs to be accountability also. Without that, there is no way that we can continue. But it's interesting that I mentioned that also as a kind of in a hard segue to a junction point now, because this parsha that we're starting, Vayikra, is the first parsha of a new book. And this book is a difficult book for many of us, especially the subjects at the beginning, which deal with sacrifices. I call it the menu of sacrifices, the different kinds of offerings that are brought to the Mishkan, later to the temple. But before we get into maybe some of those in greater detail, um, what do you like about this book? And what do you not like about this book? And as a teacher, I'm turning to you, Barry, first as a teacher, but I'm going to turn to you, Rabbi Kalmanowski, second, as the rabbi who is going to guide people through the gate of this new parsha. What can you tell people that you like about this book?
So I it's my favorite book. And I think that one of the things, so in ancient times, this would be the book that the 5-year-old Jewish child would begin to study when they were introduced to Chumash. And I think the reason is that Vayikra is a distinctively Jewish book. I think making obvious allowances that Christians, Muslims, and Jews share a wide array of morals and ethics, although each tradition goes its own way on certain things. But the ritual is what distinguishes us from everyone else. No one quite does sacrifice the way that we do. And I think that it's provides an important avenue into what concerned our ancestors. So you were talking about the menu before, and the sacrifices are kind of presented in the menu. The first sacrifice, the Olah, is consumed, as it were, only by God. The next sacrifice, the Mincha, is consumed by the priest and God. And finally, the Zavach Shlamim, the third of the three principal sacrifices, by the offerer, the priest, and God. And so everyone gets their share of the sacrifice as they unfold. And I think it could teach us something about what might really be important in our religious lives. Most of us tend to think about what's good for us, and we don't always think about what's good for our community that's not us.
Mhm.
So, for example, the Torah emphasizes the distinctive role that the priest has, even though most of us are not Kohanim, although we we bring Jeremy along to remind us what we can hope for.
I'm still
Um,
waiting for the truma.
You're still waiting.
you'll be
Multiple
waiting for
years.
a while longer. Um, and I, I think that it speaks to a kind of sensitivity and tradition that can empower us even today.
Jeremy, what do you like about this book? And
It's interesting that Barry said it's your favorite book. It's also my favorite book, although uh, that means no shade at four of the other books. I mean I actually think Bamidbar is in fifth place, but the greatness of Breshit and the greatness of Shemot and the greatness of Devarim are also tremendously stirring to me. But I do love Vayikra, even though there are some parts that are really foreign and really alien. But the parts that are um, so compelling to me have to do with I'll use a couple of English words that seem pretty goyish is our worship and communion. And this is a book about how it is that as a community, we do sacred deeds that are reverential, that are full of heart and generosity, and bring us into communion with God.
Mhm.
And that is certainly at the very, very center of religion. And we can talk, we'll save a more detailed exploration of chapter 19 until we get to Parshat
Yeah.
Kedoshim, which is, in my opinion, just the height of the Bible. It's a vision of the excellent life. But that is a claim that in your worship and in your communion, you can come to resemble the divine. And so, even though we haven't done animal sacrifices for a great many centuries, and even though I do think that the even in Bible times they had an idea, as the prophet Hosea says, "Neshalma parim sifatenu." Instead of bulls, we can offer our lips, we can offer our words, we can offer our hearts, our thoughts, our mental life. Even in Bible times, people had that intuition. uh, I'm glad that I live in when I live and not all those centuries ago. Uh, so even though some of the details are really quite foreign, the drive, the longing, the desire to give, the desire to offer your life in the by offering an animal or another kind of food-based sacrifice is to me just very, very compelling.
I want to say I have a complicated relationship with this book. Um, and not that I don't love this book, and I don't have this. The complicated relationship with this book is that I think this was the specifically Parshat Kedoshim and those chapters. I, 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 we began to study this in the seventh grade, grade seven. Had a wonderful teacher, and I really learned how to study the Torah with commentary, specifically the Torah Tamima and Rashi, and begin to understand that a world was opening up for me as we looked into, how the words can be explained. And that I want to say with, I've never lost that kind of curiosity. That's and however, as we've had these conversations over the last, 5 years now. I'm clearly animated more by Breshit and Shmot, and maybe Dvarim also, less so Bamidbar, although there's lots going on in Bamidbar, because they're driven by character, by story, by beautiful language, by poetry, etc. And I always find that I have to look very hard. So Vayikra, while it presents an anchor to me in terms of what Torah really is, and I think we all have the admission that the heart of Torah is here, and duh, it is situated in the heart of the Torah. And it's not an accident. I mean, Jeremy and I taught this class at Machane Ramah in the Berkshires, and we centered on, the key words, Kedoshim to you, at the heart of the Torah. And we could stop there, but we didn't. And of course, we included other verses. So as the animating, beating heart of the Torah, yes, this is it. In terms of character, story, poetry, it presents a deep challenge that I feel sometimes not up to, because
So,
I'm not rooted in the world. I work so hard, so hard. I want to get a lot of credit for this. Okay.
okay, but I have to interject here, Elliot, because you often bring us back by saying, what is the story here?
Exactly.
And there is a story here. And
Okay.
I think part of the story here is that religion is based on physicality. In our day, we emphasize spirituality and we lose sight sometimes of the physical point. And I was struck by your use of the word heart,
Yeah.
because what do we identify with heart? Blood.
Yeah.
And the blood plays a critical role in the sacrificial system, because it is the blood that the blood ceremony, the priests pouring or dashing the blood on the altar, is what makes the sacrifice efficacious.
It's just
And
so
why are we,
hard for us
let me
to
just finish one
go ahead.
thing.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it? Because we're acknowledging that the blood, which is life, comes from God and we're returning it to God,
Yes.
just as we one day will be returned to God as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
And
So
I think
yeah.
that could be quite powerful.
All right.
So, Elliot,
I'm a therapist.
I want for in two ways I want to try to respond to. First of all, you are quite correct to say that it is just so foreign, and I like I feel for the B'nai Mitzvah kids. The B'nai Mitzvah kids who get Genesis, right?
Tazria, Mitzora.
But the kids who get Tazria and Mitzora, whew, so I'll often say to them something like, everything in the Torah is meaningful, but
Absolutely.
sometimes you have to really dig to get there. So I think that it can be true about the sacrificial passages about Vayikra, but I'm going to just offer two things. One, I want to just really reaffirm Barry's observation about the blood, and Nachmanides says in a way which I think is amazing for a 13th century person who probably could have known very little about other religions. I mean, except of course for that heretical form of Judaism that is all about human sacrifice. That the point of sacrifice is especially the smicha of the person, the offering person's hands upon the animal. Nachmanides explains in the first chapter, chapter of Vayikra, that ultimately every sacrifice is a symbolic human sacrifice. We don't actually end our lives, but if God demanded that we end our lives, that would be totally just because our life is even just an unearned gift. And so we, with every sacrifice, lay our hands on it and say, this body and blood could be me. And thankfully, I can substitute. And so the gift is a symbolic gift of your own life. And the dashing of the blood is a symbolic offering of your own blood. And you will come back from that and you will live differently on the other end. So that's one thing. But the second thing I want to say is that, in the last maybe 3-4 years, three years, I guess, my wife Amy has become a fanatic for dance, tap dances especially. She tap dances several times a week and loves dance performances. We've been to lots of dance performances. It's not something I ever would have gotten to on my own or entirely or even dimly understand the kind of language, the aesthetic language of different forms of dance. There's certainly some performances that I've gone to that I didn't get, but others that I really got something out of. And that is a kind of non-verbal art form. And you don't have to say, you don't have to, you cannot turn this or that dance into words or story. As a matter of fact, I learned from Amy that the uniqueness of the 20th century choreographer George Balanchine is that he took ballet away from story. It wasn't just in service of a story. It was just the movements and the beauty of the movements. And you could say that the art of korbanot, I wonder if there's a way that we could think of the art of korbanot as something like a dance. We don't have to turn everything into a narrative. In fact, some things are just movements that are freighted with precision. Like music has to be in tune. These movements have to be perfect. And they what do they mean? They mean themselves. They mean this gift done in this way, in an artistic and aesthetic fashion.
Well, let's go there then. Okay, so let's go to chapter 1 of Leviticus, and we'll go right. You quoted the Samach Yado al Rosh Ha'olah, verse 4, and I think there's a debate to be had exactly what smicha means. Is it substitution or not? And I'm not ready. I react strongly to the idea that it's me, but I don't really have a good response yet. I'm gonna study up for next year on
Can I
that.
ask you a question before you go on? It is pouring rain here and it's very loud. Can you hear the rain? Should
I
I
can't hear
mute?
the rain. No,
No.
Okay,
you're blocked
good.
out. Okay. V'samach yado al Rosh Hashanah, he puts his hand on the Rosh Hashanah, he indexes it, he designates it, v'nirtzah lo lechaper alav, and it's there to atone for him. So now we have what you're going to call art, and what I will call uh, ceremony procedure. I think we could certainly put that under the rubric of something that is elevated. V'shachatet ben abakar, he slaughters it, lifnei Adonai, before God, v'krivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim et adam. And so the sons of Aaron, the priests, they bring the blood forward, v'zarku et adam ala mizbeach saviv, they throw the blood on the altar around it. Asher petach olamid. So this is a ceremonial act. They're not just like taking, they're not just throwing it. There's a choreography here. I think you're correct. Okay, the shita daolah, they skin the animal, v'nitach ota lintacheha, they cut it up into pieces. V'natnu b'nei Aaron hakohen esh ala mizbeach, the children of Aaron put fire on the altar. Varchu etzim ala etz, they put wood on top of the fire. Varchu b'nei Aaron hakohanim et hanetachim, they take all of the pieces, et harosh, et hapader, the head, and all of the other innards. Ala itzim asher ala esh asher ala mizbeach. They put it on the fire. I'm sorry, on the wood, on the fire, and on the altar. And Mary Douglas, who writes on Leviticus, says, "There's your poetry." She's talking to me. She's saying, "There's a poetic, trope. Al ha esh al ha I'm sorry. Uh, Ala etzim, ala esh, ala mizbeach. It's like a hadgadya there, okay? And then it says vikirbo v'churav yichas b'mayim. They take the innards, they take all the limbs, they wash it. V'ktira kohen hakol mizbecha. They turn it into smoke. Olah. It's a olah, a burnt
Yeah,
offering.
I think it was originally pronounced Olay.
Olah. Ishe rea dikoach ladonai. We had a member in our shul, Alav Shalom, he's passed away. It was Rosh Chodesh yesterday, and the Rosh Chodesh reading is Vikrafta Ishe. So he used to say Vikrafta Isha.
The divorced people say that. Yeah.
So okay, we're not going to translate that. So my point is that there's so uh and it's interesting because in animated videos of this, there was the beautiful movie that was done called on the destruction of the temple. Uh, Israeli
Or
movie.
Banabayat?
No. It was produced a couple of years ago, and so they have elaborate scenes of this kind of choreography of a slaughter, of the blood, of the ritual, slicing up of the animal, and it controls violence. It controls, but it also kind of lends itself to what people will do when they have to butcher their animals, which was a
Right.
constant feature of life until some of us stopped eating that.
Became vegans, yes. So, but a couple of things might be pointed out here. First of all, I think what's noteworthy about the sectioning of the animal is that they had to get it to fit on the altar. That's why they sectioned it, because otherwise it would not fit in
No, I
order
don't
to
think.
bring.
I'm sorry. Of course, there's a practical element to it, but there's also a story element to it because they load it up in layers and they put the
Okay, but the point I wanted to make, which maybe is better, is that the Kohanim are mentioned exactly twice, with in connection with the blood, which goes down, it's sprinkled onto the altar, and with a fire, which goes up, because we are kind of pulled in two directions. We are pulled towards the earth where we live, and we aspire to the heavens where God lives, at least in the image of Devarim. And I think that the the priest here is a kind of a fulcrum operating between these worlds. You like to talk about liminal states.
yeah.
He's between the two states, and he is the one who's making this all work. He's the director. He's not the dancer so much as the director, bringing all the pieces together, however sectioned they might be.
But again, so I want to go back to Jeremy's point, which is that so there is art here. There's staging here. There's a choreography here. There's a procession here, and I never really thought about it in these terms, but you're quite right in the sense that there's nothing spoken here. There's no liturgy here when they do this, and that what an honor it is if you're the priest that gets the I don't know the shank, the left bone, or the all the pieces of bones. You're the priest that brings the head of the animal and that's covered in the special, the fat of the of the organs, right? And you have that. I mean, it's like an aliyah, you know,
Well, literally, because they're going up to the altar.
literally, right? So it's just not. It's telling a story that I'm not in, or maybe I should be in.
Well,
And
but you're not in properly speaking because you're not a Kohen.
okay,
You're
fine, but
in as the observer. The person bringing the offering is part of the sacrifice as well.
all
And we
right.
should not lose sight of that.
So talk to me about the word karov, korban, lakriv, as the unique word that's
So
happening here.
these are layered movements of the various people and animals approaching God. And they're all needed. They have to, work together, as it were, because in order to approach God, you can't go by yourself. You need the priest, you need the animal, and you need yourself. And even though the offerer, the last thing he might possibly do, the way I understand the text here, is slaughter the animal. Although there's a machloket, a controversy among the rabbis as to who slaughters the animal. It seems the basic meaning of the text here is that the offerer slaughters the animal, and then the priest takes over
I think
for
that's
the
right.
blood ceremony.
I think that's
Uh-huh.
right. I think that's right. I think that the czar, the non-priest, can do everything up to and including sacrifice, slaughtering, and then the Kohanim take over.
So what?
I want to make one, another thing from other religions, and I think we've talked about this occasionally in the past, like the icons in especially Eastern Orthodox churches, but maybe Roman Catholic as well, um, were about communicating the story to an illiterate audience. And Jews, of course, Muslims even more, very uncomfortable with representative iconography, and the illiterate public, who couldn't take out a sefer. We get this idea like every Jew throughout history was actually a Talmid Chacham. Of course, it's absurd, right? Most people were farmers or shoemakers or whatever, and illiterate and not capable. And I'm thinking that sacrifices may have also been a drama that was highly communicative to people who, weren't ideas people or didn't know how to read and didn't know how to be involved in these things. The sacrifice is like, this is and Vayikra does use a phrase that is, very jarring to the monotheistic ear, the priests at Lechem Elohehem Hem Makrivim V'Hayu Kodesh, they offer the food of their God and so are holy. Like food, really? But God smells the reach nichoach. God smells the offering, and it seems to be an idea something like human beings eat with their mouth, and God eats with God's nose. By absorbing the spirit, something like that. But I can see how that would have been a real big piece of the religious life of an otherwise illiterate person who was not studying Baba Batra.
All right. So let me try and make a story here, or open the door to a story, and that has to do with Vayikra, the first word here, and I want to tell the story that this is juxtaposed with the end of the book of Shmot, where we had just reached this climactic moment. The sanctuary is completed. All the pieces are, but it's really quite joyful. Okay, uh, and what happens there is that the Mishkan fills up with smoke. It fills up to such a point that Moses even can't go in there. It says, go back to Shemot chapter 40, "Vayichas ha'anan et ol moed," the cloud covers the tent. "Chod Adonai maleh et hamishkan," God's presence fills the Mishkan. "V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el moed." He can't get in there. Ki shachan alav ha'anan. That because God's cloud is there, it's filled with the cloud. So I'm reading with a certain pathos, saying, here it is, the tent is finished, and he wants to go in, but he can't go in because if he goes in, he'll choke. And this is a story. The story is, I'm here, you're outside, you want to come in, you can't come in, and you're detached from me, You want this, you want to be there because for you, this is Sinai. This is like your experience. You had an experience on Sinai. I guess it was a good experience until you had to go down and you went back up. And now I'm in there, God, and you're not here. And I want to press the stopwatch and ask how many beats are going now. Count how many beats and what's going on in Moses' mind. Here's my story. My story is that it's pause, one, two, three, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting. What am I supposed to do? Where am I going to be? There's a tension here until Vayikra. And that's my story. My story is that God is calling him from inside, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed lemor, from the tent, but you're not in the tent. You're going to hear this outside the tent. And you're going to have to transmit this outside. At one time you're going to come in, but not right now. And how does that sit with Moses? How does that sit with us? How does it sit with the people? Is there tension there? Am I making, what do you think?
That's
Great
great.
story.
Great
Great.
story.
No,
Well, okay,
it
so respond. My reaction is okay. So yeah, I'll quote this.
But Elliot, while you're looking, it seems though that what you're suggesting is that this text in Vayikra is supposed to teach us something about Sinai. So God was also impenetrable at Sinai as well.
Yes, correct.
And we often lose sight of that fact because our image of Sinai is Moses on top of the mountain being enveloped in some way by God. But Moses stood as a solitary individual as well, and God called out to him.
So it's the same here. It's the same.
So it's an echo of Sinai.
Exactly. But it's the desire, as this guy Yair Agmon says, it's the desire for dialogue. Sefer Shel Mifgash, it's a book of meeting, Shel Dialog Chadash Ben Elohim Leven Bnei Adam. It's a dialogue between God and human beings.
And it's a
why does
dialogue
why,
that God needs as well, because
Yeah.
God is the one who initiates it both times.
Right?
you can furthermore say this the gap between Parshat Pekudei and Parshat Vayikra are maybe something like the gap between Miketz and Vayesha because it's in the middle of a story,
Yeah.
right? In Genesis, Joseph has the brothers. He's got them, dangling on a string, and he says, "That's it. I'm sending Benjamin into jail, and the rest of you can go home free." And then the parsha ends. And then the next week, we were 1 week in that tension-filled moment, and Judah says, "Let me come close," and they work out a different, a reconciliation. Similarly here, and this part is very closely aligned to what you were saying about Ma'amad Har Sinai, is that like it's hard enough for us to understand what's going on in a dialogue with another human being of more or less equal background or comparable background and comparable experience. And if I talk to you, we're both human beings and we both live in a similar way and we both known each other long. If I'm talking to God, there's a whole big communication gap. So God has directed Moshe to do all this stuff, and he's done all this stuff, and he did tremendous effort. And then God's totally in there, and am, am I supposed to knock?
Exactly.
What do you think I'm supposed to do? Am I supposed to just go in? And so we have this tension at the end of Pikudei, and then God says, "Come
He's
on."
motioning, but does he get in there? I mean, let's be clear on the text. It's Vayikra el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav me ohel moed lemor. So the voice is coming out of Ohel Moed, and the voice it is an echo of sign. It is a kind of reproduction of.
Right. But Moses is there, at least if I remember Rashi correctly, because the voice stops at the border of the Ohel Moed.
So he's standing at
It's only heard by Moshe.
only at the kind of the
Right.
open
So he must be inside or
the
close to the
zipper
inside in some
the
way.
zipper of the tent.
Yeah. Anyway, you don't have to knock, you can ring the bell.
Okay, good, good. Well, there's the beautiful Rashi, about it's a courtesy that the Shon Chiba. I think that's the Rashi here, where God is announcing before speaking, and that uh, provides a sense of courtesy to Moshe.
Right, but it also, I think it's kind of a model for the lives that we live because we struggle to approach God over and over again. We're not always successful, but we have to keep trying anyway because that's what draws us.
So that's why let's go back to this idea that this is the heart of the Torah, because at the heart of the Torah is really a desire to break through, that God wants to break through to humanity, and human beings, when they are attuned, want to respond in some ways. And
Right.
here is what God, I mean, so just take this one step further, which is the content of what God is saying is, here's how you do it. You have an olah, a mincha, a zvachim, a chatat, an asham. These are the different categories of sacrifice. Is is that what Moses wants to hear? Is that
Well, it's worth a moment to think about the book as a whole. And the book as a whole, I think, very carefully delineates the boundaries between what's in and what's out.
okay?
That's what Tuma and Tara is, purity and purity, things that are part of our community at the moment and things that must be excluded from our community. So at the same time, we're establishing these borders, we're also trying to break through them as well. And
Indeed,
that's, I think, the religious tension.
indeed. Okay. Well, here we are. We're just scratching the surface again as we begin. And look, we're also kind of mindful that we started the new month of Nisan. We're recording this earlier in the week. It's now the second day of Nisan. So we're in this special month, no Tachanun this month, and other things. We're getting ready for Pesach, and we will, of course, be turning to those themes. Sacrifice, of course, animals. That's critical for Pesach as well, with the Korban Pesach at the heart of the whole experience, but also the drama, the human drama of wanting to connect, to be connected to each other, and to be connected to something beyond you, and of course to God as well. And with that, we just want to say thank you to our viewers, to our listeners. Thank you for joining us. You have so many opportunities to spend time, and you chose us, and we are very, very honored by that. So, wish you all a good week, and we'll see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Bye bye. Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom.